I'm not even sure where to begin, but I guess you could say it started like any other trip for me. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know the kind of stuff I do. Exploring abandoned mines, forgotten towns, and those creepy graveyards people swear don't exist. That's kind of my thing. My name's David, but you probably know me by my channel name, Dave Digs Deep. I've been doing this for a few years, and I've seen my share of weird stuff, rusted out equipment in mines that no one's touched for decades, old shacks with furniture still intact, even some places that felt off. You know what I mean, that feeling in your gut that tells you something isn't right, but you can't put your finger on it. Yeah, that's normal for me. But this last trip, this one, it still gives me chills. So, I'd been hearing about this forest upstate. A few locals said it was cursed, or haunted, or something like that. You hear that kind of stuff all the time, and it's usually nothing. Still, I'm always down for a new adventure, and people seem to genuinely avoid this place. The real kicker? There were rumors about some old settlement deep in the woods, one that wasn't on any map. Some said it was Native American, others said it was a small commune that vanished without a trace in the 1930s. You know, perfect content for a video. I packed my gear, camera, drone, flashlight, all the usual stuff, and drove up to the trailhead early in the morning. The sun was just coming up, casting this orange glow through the fog. It felt eerie in a cool way, like the start of one of those horror movies where the guy doesn't know what he's getting into. I parked my truck, checked my phone one last time, no signal, naturally, and set off into the trees. The hike wasn't bad at first. It was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my boots crunching leaves. After a couple of hours, the trail disappeared, and I had to rely on my compass and an old hand-drawn map I'd found online. It felt like I was going back in time, deeper and deeper into something untouched. I stopped to film a quick update for the channel, mostly to break the silence. Alright guys, I said into the camera, I'm about 3 hours in, and this place is just as creepy as advertised. No signs of life, no sounds at all. It's like I'm the last person on Earth right now. Stay tuned, though. I've got a good feeling about this one. As I walked, the trees seemed to grow denser, their branches tangled together like they were trying to keep something hidden. I'd never seen trees like that, gnarled, twisted, and covered in a thick layer of moss that almost felt alive under my fingers. There were no clear paths anymore, just game trails and overgrown patches of forest floor that hadn't been disturbed in ages. That's when I saw it, the first sign that something was off. A rusted metal fence, barely visible through the undergrowth. It was the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't paying attention, but I've got an eye for that sort of stuff. I pushed through the bushes and found an old sign hanging from the fence. The lettering was faded, but I could just make it out, no trespassing. I laughed to myself, because of course that was there. It's almost like a dare for someone like me. So, naturally, I went in. Inside the fence, things got weirder. There were old wooden structures, mostly collapsed, but one or two were still standing. They looked like they could have been cabins at some point, but they were built low to the ground, almost like they were trying to stay hidden. That's when I found the first grave. It was unmarked, just a pile of rocks, really. The kind of thing you'd see in an old Western movie. But there were more, at least 10, scattered around the clearing. I filmed it all, narrating as I went. Looks like we've got some old graves here. No markers, no names. Could be anything from early settlers to something stranger. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Is this freaky, or what? I kept moving, feeling that gnawing sensation in my gut again. Something wasn't right. The air was thick, like it was hard to breathe. But it wasn't until I found the trapdoor that things really took a turn. Hidden under a patch of moss, right in the middle of the clearing, was a wooden door, barely big enough for a person to fit through. It looked ancient, like something out of a nightmare, with deep scratches carved into the wood. I hesitated, but only for a second. I mean, this is what I do, right? I live for this kind of find. My viewers would go nuts over it. I pried the door open, the wood creaking like it hadn't been touched in decades. A dark hole gaped at me from below, and the stench that came out of it was enough to make me gag. It was like a mix of rotting meat and something worse, something decayed. I had to know what was down there. I turned on my flashlight and lowered myself into the hole. And that's when I saw it. The cannibal. Well, at least, the first one. The second I dropped into that hole, the smell hit me even harder. My flashlight flickered across the dirt walls, and there were bones. Everywhere. Some looked like animal bones, but others, well, they didn't. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to film. Guys, this is... I don't even know what this is, I whispered into the camera. The walls of the underground room were lined with old tools, knives, and what looked like makeshift cages. My heart was pounding, but I kept filming, hoping to turn this into my most watched video yet. Then I heard it, a faint rustling, like something was moving further down the passage. I froze. My mind raced. There shouldn't have been anyone down here. No one had been here for years, right? I shined my flashlight down the dark tunnel, my hand shaking so bad I could barely hold it steady. That's when I saw him. He was crouched in the shadows, his back to me, gnawing on something. I couldn't make out what it was, but it looked raw and bloody. My body went cold. The guy was filthy, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones, his hair a matted mess. He wasn't just living down here, he was surviving on whatever he could find. And from the looks of it, that meant anything. I started backing up, careful not to make a sound. But the floor creaked beneath my weight. He whipped around, and that's when I saw his face. Wild, sunken eyes, his mouth smeared with blood. I've never seen anything like it before or since. I bolted, scrambling out of that hole like my life depended on it. And it probably did. I could hear him following me, his footsteps heavy, too fast. I burst out into the clearing, slamming the trapdoor shut behind me. For a second, everything was silent. Then, the banging started. He was trying to get out. I didn't stick around. I ran, crashing through the trees, not stopping until I made it back to my truck. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the key. I drove the whole way home in silence, still in shock. I wrote about it on my blog that night, detailing everything I'd seen, but no one believed me. Not without proof. They thought it was some elaborate prank. Some said I was just trying to hype up my channel. But I know what I saw. And that was just the beginning. After that post, things got weird. My followers blew up the blog, calling me out, saying I had to go back. They wanted video proof. Without it, no one believed a word of what I'd written. I kept reading the comments. Come on, David, you're better than this. Nice creepypasta, bro. Now let's see the footage. If this is real, prove it. The pressure was relentless. Every day, my inbox was full of messages, and the YouTube comments? Even worse. People practically dared me to return. Part of me wanted to just let it go, forget I ever saw that place, but the bigger part of me, my pride, couldn't back down. It was my job to explore the unknown. How could I claim to be serious about it if I didn't finish what I'd started? I spent days convincing myself it was all in my head. Maybe the guy wasn't some cannibal living underground. Maybe he was just a crazy hermit, someone squatting in the woods, scavenging for food. The whole eating people thing. I tried to chalk it up to my imagination, fear twisting what I saw. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't add up. The bones, the cages, the stench, something wasn't right. Still, I couldn't shake the guilt. I had no proof. The footage I had didn't show the man clearly, and I'd been so panicked that most of it was shaky, unfocused, barely usable. After a week of nonstop badgering from my followers, I decided to go back. This time, I'd be prepared. I told myself it'd be quick. I'd get the footage, find that underground room again, and film everything properly. Then, I'd leave. No lingering. No exploring any deeper. Just in and out. I made a big show of it, too, live-streamed a whole prep video the night before. My followers were hyped, urging me on, treating it like a big adventure. They had no idea what was really out there. I couldn't shake the dread that had settled in my gut, but I figured it'd be over soon enough. The next morning, I loaded up my truck again, more gear this time. A backup camera, night vision, portable batteries, even a flare gun, just in case. I didn't plan on using it, but it made me feel better knowing I had something. If nothing else, I could signal for help. Not that anyone would be close enough to see it. I set off early again, this time posting a quick update for my viewers before losing signal. Alright guys, heading back to the woods where it all went down. Let's see if I can find some real proof this time. Wish me luck. I had that same feeling of unease as I drove into the mountains, but I tried to push it down. By the time I reached the trailhead, my nerves were buzzing. I hiked back in, the same path, the same silence. But this time, it felt worse. The woods were darker, the air thicker. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. It didn't take long to find the fence again. When I stepped into the clearing, I saw the trapdoor exactly where I'd left it. But something had changed. The door was open. I swear I'd slammed it shut. But now, it hung loosely, revealing the dark hole beneath. I felt my heart race, but I had to keep going. I had to know. I started filming again, narrating everything like I was back in control. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. Standing there, staring at the open trapdoor, I knew this wasn't just some ordinary trip. Something was wrong. My pulse was hammering in my ears, but I pushed myself forward. I had to do it, for my followers, for myself. If I backed out now, I'd be branded a coward, a fake. The fear wasn't going to stop me. I set my camera up on a tripod, capturing the moment before I descended. I tried to crack a joke to lighten the mood, but my voice came out shaky. All right, guys, heading back down. Hopefully, our friend isn't home. I switched on my flashlight and climbed down into the hole, my heart thudding in my chest. The smell hit me again, stale air and rot. But there was something else this time, something fresher. The walls looked even more disturbing in the dim light, and I realized there were scratches all over them, as if something, or someone, had been trying to claw their way out. I held the camera tight, filming everything. As I moved deeper, I noticed something on the ground. At first, I thought it was dirt, but when I knelt down, I saw it was blood. Fresh, dark stains, leading further down the tunnel. That's when I heard it, the same sound from before. A shuffling noise, slow and deliberate. It was coming from deeper in the tunnel. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to get out while I still could, but my feet kept moving. I'd come this far, and now I had proof. I had to see this through. The tunnel twisted, narrowing as I went. The air grew colder, and the silence felt suffocating. Then, my flashlight caught something up ahead, a figure. It was slumped against the wall, unmoving. For a moment, I thought it was another hermit, maybe the one I'd seen before. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving because it wasn't alive. The body was half decayed, its clothes shredded, skin barely clinging to bone. My stomach lurched, and I struggled to keep my composure. But this wasn't just some random person. In its hand, clutched tightly against its chest, was a camera, an old, rusted camcorder. I recognized it immediately. This wasn't just a body. It was one of the missing hikers. There'd been rumors, of course. Stories of people who wandered too far into these woods and never came back. But to see it in front of me, to know that it wasn't just a story? That's when it hit me, there was no way this was all just some misunderstanding. Suddenly, I heard another noise, a scraping sound. It was coming from just around the bend. The same tunnel where I'd seen the cannibal last time. I froze, my grip tightening on the camera. I had two choices, turn back now and run for my life, or face whatever was down that tunnel. The scraping grew louder. Something, or someone, was coming. Slowly, I edged toward the corner, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I raised the camera, my flashlight pointing down the dark passage. And that's when I saw it. Not one, but three figures. They were crouched low, their bodies contorted and skeletal, like they hadn't eaten in weeks. Their eyes gleamed in the dim light, animalistic, hungry. They hadn't seen me yet, but I could feel the tension, the anticipation. I took a step back, careful not to make a sound. Then, I made the worst mistake of my life. I dropped my flashlight. The clatter echoed through the tunnel, and all three of them snapped their heads in my direction. In that split second, their faces contorted with rage and hunger. I could see their teeth, sharp and jagged, as they lunged toward me. I didn't think. I just ran. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps fast and heavy. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, and my legs felt like they were moving through quicksand. I was running blind, the flashlight gone, but I knew the way out. I could feel the cold air from the surface. I reached the ladder, scrambling up as fast as I could, my fingers slipping on the rungs. The pounding behind me grew louder, closer. Just as I pulled myself out of the hole, I felt something brush against my leg, cold, bony fingers. I kicked, hard, and slammed the trapdoor shut. The pounding continued for a few seconds before it stopped. Everything was quiet again. Too quiet. Breathing heavily, I backed away from the door, my body trembling. I was alive, but barely. I didn't stick around to see if they'd follow me. I grabbed my camera, my gear, and ran back through the woods, not stopping until I was in my truck, slamming the door behind me. I drove straight home, not even caring about the footage. I didn't sleep that night. All I could think about were those eyes, those faces. And the worst part? I knew they were still out there. After that second trip, I swore I was done. I had enough footage to show something creepy was going on, even if it wasn't the full story. I edited the video, cutting out the most terrifying parts, and posted it to my channel. But the comments, the comments. People were hooked, but they wanted more. No matter how clear I was in saying I wouldn't go back, my followers didn't care. They wanted me to go deeper, to find the truth. They thought it was all just a gimmick, a setup. We want to see the real deal, they kept saying. Don't half-ass it. I was losing my mind over it. The pressure was intense, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about those three cannibals. What if they were part of something bigger? What if the bodies I found weren't the only ones? Weeks went by, and the video kept blowing up, the views skyrocketing. Every day, new messages poured in, go back. You owe us that. The pressure became too much. Maybe it was my pride, maybe it was the adrenaline junkie in me, but eventually, I broke. I told myself one last trip would settle everything. This time, I'd go prepared, cameras rolling nonstop, enough gear to survive anything. I even hired a guide named Kyle, a local who knew the area better than anyone. He wasn't a fan of the idea, but the money was good, and I think even he was curious. I went live one last time before heading out, telling my followers this would be my final trip. I'm doing this for you guys, I said, even though deep down I was terrified. We're going all the way this time. No more secrets. That was the last anyone heard from me. Days passed. Then weeks. The police were called. A search party went into the woods, retracing my steps, but they found nothing. At least, not at first. It was Kyle who finally broke the silence, stumbling out of the forest alone, disoriented and babbling. He was missing for almost 2 days, and when they found him, he could barely speak. When he finally started talking, his story didn't make sense. He kept muttering about the tunnels, about figures in the dark. He said they were watching us the whole time. But there was one thing he kept repeating over and over: David didn't make it. The authorities wrote me off as another lost hiker, a guy who went too deep and got in over his head. My channel blew up after that, people speculating, spinning theories. Some said I'd faked my own disappearance for publicity. Others believed something sinister was really out there, something the cops didn't want to admit. The truth didn't come out until a month later, when they found my camera and my right hand about a mile away from the clearing where I'd last been seen. The footage? It wasn't what people expected. It was shaky, dark, and terrifying. At first, it's just me and Kyle walking through the trees, talking about how quiet the woods had gotten. But then the footage changes, the camera swinging wildly as we stumble across a scene I hadn't mentioned before, another campsite, one I hadn't seen on my previous trips. And it wasn't abandoned. Tents ripped open, blood on the ground, like someone had been living there until something, or someone, came for them. The video cuts out after that, replaced by wild, chaotic footage of us running. You can hear me panting, shouting, but you can't make out much else. And then there's a final shot, my camera dropping to the ground, rolling until it comes to a stop, facing my outstretched hand. That's when the figures appear. Just like before. 3 of them, moving slowly, deliberately. You can't see their faces clearly, but you can tell they're watching, waiting. And then the video cuts to black. That's all anyone knows. To this day, my channel's still up. People still debate whether it was all real or a hoax. But every now and then, someone stumbles across that final video and leaves a comment that chills me to the bone. They're still out there, David. And they're waiting for someone else to come.